They found her half buried in the snow, a lone woman abandoned in Thunder Valley. The settlers who left her there thought they'd seen the last of Sarah Mitchell, a widow with nothing but her wedding ring and the clothes on her back. They were wrong. Colton Reed wasn't supposed to be riding through the valley that day. The richest rancher in the territory usually took the main trail. But something, fate, providence, or just plain luck, led him down that lonely path. He found her barely breathing, her lips blue with cold. What he didn't know was that saving her life would change his forever. Sarah Mitchell was no ordinary widow, and the people who tried to kill her weren't done yet. Could love bloom in the shadow of revenge? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell's fingers had long since gone numb. The torn pages of her journal scattered around her in the snow, her last attempt to start a fire rendered useless by the howling wind. She'd been walking for hours, or maybe days. Time had become a blur of white landscape and biting cold. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the winter wind. Her wedding ring caught what little sunlight filtered through the clouds, a bitter reminder of everything she'd lost. First Thomas, taken by fever last spring, and now this, betrayed by the very people who'd promised to help her through her. Grief. She should have seen it coming. The way Martha Blackwood's eyes had narrowed when Sarah refused James Blackwood's proposal. "A widow can't survive alone," Martha had said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You need a man's protection." But Sarah hadn't wanted James Blackwood's kind of protection. She'd seen the bruises on his first wife's face before consumption claimed her. She'd rather face the wilderness alone than chain herself to a man like that. The settlers hadn't taken her refusal well. They'd come in the night, dragged her from her small cabin and loaded her into a wagon. "If you won't be reasonable," Elder Thompson had said, "then you leave us no choice. We can't support every stubborn widow who won't do what's right." They'd driven for hours in the bitter cold, deep into Thunder Valley where no one would find her. They'd left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and her wedding ring. "So you can remember your foolish pride," Martha had sneered. Sarah stumbled, catching herself against a snow-covered pine. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and the constant shivering had given way to an unsettling warmth. She knew enough about winter to know that was a bad sign. "Thomas," she whispered, touching her ring, "I'm sorry. I tried to be strong, like you always said I was." The tears froze on her cheeks as she slid down against the tree trunk. The snow was almost soft now, like the feather bed they'd shared in happier times. Just a short rest, she told herself. Just a moment to catch her breath. But as her eyes drifted closed, a part of her knew that if she slept now, she'd never wake up. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Maybe Thomas was waiting for her somewhere warm and bright. The sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading consciousness. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the weak winter sun. She tried to open her eyes, to call out, but her body wouldn't respond. The last thing she felt was strong arms lifting her in from the snow and a deep voice calling out words she couldn't understand. Then darkness took her, and Sarah Mitchell knew no more. Colton Reed didn't believe in fate, but something had drawn him to Thunder Valley that morning. The deed to his ranch lay tucked in his saddlebag, 20,000 acres of the finest grazing land in the Wyoming Territory, and he usually stuck to the main trail when checking his boundaries. But today, his stallion Shadow had been restless, fighting the rains when he'd tried to take their usual route. "All right, boy," he'd muttered, letting the horse have his head. "Show me what's got you so worked up." Now, kneeling in the snow beside an unconscious woman, he understood Shadow's urgency. She was barely breathing, her skin almost as white as the snow around her. Scattered papers caught his eye, journal pages, the ink running from the moisture, speaking of desperation and betrayal. "Miss?" He touched her cheek, feeling the dangerous coldness of her skin. "Can you hear me?" No response, but a faint pulse still fluttered in her throat, and her breath made tiny clouds in the frigid air. She wasn't gone yet. Colton shrugged off his heavy wool coat, wrapping it around her slight frame. A glint of gold caught his eye, a wedding ring. So she was married. But where was her husband? Why was she out here alone? "Hold on, ma'am," he said, gathering her carefully in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird with frozen wings. Shadow stood steady as Colton mounted, keeping the woman secure against his chest. The wind was picking up, carrying the promise of more snow. Colton could see tracks leading away from where he'd found her, wagon wheels and multiple horses. This was no accident. Someone had left her here to die. His jaw tightened. In 15 years of ranching in the territory, he'd seen his share of cruelty, but leaving a woman to freeze to death? That was a special kind of evil. Shadow knew the way home, picking his path carefully through the deepening snow. Colton kept one arm tight around the woman, monitoring her shallow breathing. His ranch house was the closest shelter for miles, a sturdy 2-story build of thick logs and river stone that had earned him more than a few comments about excessive pride. "Jenkins," he called as they approached the house. His foreman appeared. On the porch, eyes widening at the sight of the unconscious woman. "Get Mrs. Cooper," Colton ordered, referring to his housekeeper, "and send for Doc Matthews, quick as you can." Jenkins didn't waste time with questions, disappearing inside. By the time Colton dismounted with his burden, Mrs. Cooper was holding the door open, her usually stern face softening with concern. "Lord above," she breathed, taking in the woman's condition. "Bring her to the guest room. I'll heat water and get blankets." The guest room was the finest in the house after Colton's own chambers, with a large fireplace and thick rugs on the floor. He laid the woman gently on the bed, while Mrs. Cooper bustled about, efficiently stripping away wet clothes and wrapping her in warm blankets. "She's wearing a wedding ring," Mrs. Cooper noted, her tone questioning. "Found her alone in Thunder Valley," Colton replied. "Someone left her there on purpose." Mrs. Cooper's expression hardened. She'd been with the ranch since Colton's parents died, helping him build it into what it was today. She knew the territory's darker side as well as he did. "Well, they didn't count on you finding her," she said firmly. "And I didn't spend 15 years teaching you proper Christian charity for nothing." "We'll see her right, Mr. Reed." Colton nodded, stepping back to let Mrs. Cooper work. Through the window he could see Jenkins riding out for the doctor, disappearing into the swirling snow. The woman's journal pages crinkled in his pocket, and he made a mental note to read them later. Someone had tried to murder her, and his ranch had just been drawn into whatever dark business lay behind that attempt. But looking at her face, peaceful now in unconsciousness, he knew he'd made the right choice. His parents had taught him that. A man's character was measured by how he treated those in need, and whatever trouble this brought to his door, he'd face it standing tall. "You're safe now, ma'am," he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him. "I give you my word on that." Mrs. Cooper worked swiftly, wrapping Sarah in her grandmother's quilt, a cherished heirloom she'd brought west from Virginia. The squares of faded calico and muslin held generations of warmth, and the old woman whispered prayers into each layer she tucked around the frozen stranger. Doc Matthews arrived as the sun was setting, his medical bag crusted with snow. He was a gruff man with gentle hands, weathered by 20 years of frontier medicine. "Found her in Thunder Valley, you say?" He checked Sarah's pulse, frowning. "Damn miracle she's alive. Seen strong men die in less time out there." Colton stood by the window, watching snow gather on the sill. "Will she make it? If we can get her temperature up, maybe. Need to watch for fever, though. Sometimes the body fights too hard coming back from the cold." Mrs. Cooper had already set up a vigil by the bed, her knitting needles clicking softly. As she worked, "I'll not leave her side, Mr. Reed. You see to the ranch." But Colton found himself returning throughout the evening, between checking his cattle and meeting with his foreman. Each time, he'd pause in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of Sarah's chest beneath the quilt. Night fell hard and fast, the wind howling around the eaves. The ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse, trading theories about their mysterious guest. Jenkins had to quiet them twice when the speculation grew too wild. "Whoever she is," he told them firmly, "she's under Mr. Reed's protection now. That's all you need to know." In the main house, Sarah stirred fitfully in her fever dreams. "No, please, I won't." The words came broken, frightened. Mrs. Cooper dabbed her forehead with cool cloths. "Hush now, child. You're safe here." Colton appeared in the doorway again, his expression troubled. "Any change?" "The fever's fighting hard," Mrs. Cooper replied. "But she's strong, I can tell." He nodded, then pulled the torn journal pages from his pocket. "Found these where I discovered her. Thought you should see them." Mrs. Cooper read slowly, her face darkening. "Those monsters," she whispered. "To do this to a widow. There's a special place in hell." "The Blackwoods," Colton said grimly. "I've heard rumors about James before. Never thought they'd go this far. What will you do? For now, keep her safe. After that, depends on what she wants." Sarah moaned softly, turning her head. In the firelight, they could see the bruises on her wrists where rough hands had grabbed her. "Those bastards marked her," Mrs. Cooper hissed, all pretense of proper language forgotten. "I hope you make them pay, Mr. Reed. All in good time." "Mrs. Cooper, first we need her well." The night deepened. Mrs. Cooper dozed in her chair while Colton paced the house, unable to sleep. Something about this woman called to him, perhaps her vulnerability, or maybe the strength it must have taken to refuse a monster like James Blackwood. Near dawn, Sarah's fever broke. Her breathing steadied, and some color returned to her cheeks. Mrs. Cooper woke to find her charge sleeping naturally at last, the worst danger past. "Thank the Lord," she murmured, adjusting the quilt. The early morning light caught the wedding ring on Sarah's finger, making it glow like a promise. Colton came in with coffee for Mrs. Cooper, his own cup steaming in the cold morning air. "You should rest. I'll watch her for a while." "Ha! And what do you know about nursing? Enough to call you if anything changes." She studied him for a moment, seeing something in his face that made her smile knowingly. "Very well, but mind you stay in that chair by the door. Wouldn't be proper otherwise." He settled into the chair, watching the sunrise paint gold across Sarah's peaceful face. The grandmother's quilt rose and fell with her breathing, each moment a small victory over death. Outside, the ranch was coming to life. Cattle lowed in the distance and boots crunched on fresh snow as the hands began. And their day. But here in this room, time seemed to pause, waiting for a woman to wake and tell her story. Sarah woke to the unfamiliar smell of pine smoke and coffee. For a moment, she thought she was back in her cabin with Thomas. Then the memories crashed over her. The settlers, the cold, the darkness. Her eyes flew open as she tried to sit. Up, panic rising in her throat. "Easy now," came a woman's steady voice. "You're safe here." An elderly woman sat nearby, her silver hair neatly pinned back, holding a small brown bottle of medicine. Sarah recognized the label from the doctors. Treatments during Thomas's fever. "Where?" Her voice cracked, dry as autumn leaves. "Reed Ranch," the woman said, helping her sip water from a tin cup. "Mr. Reed found you in Thunder Valley 2 days ago. I'm Mrs. Cooper, his housekeeper." Sarah's hand trembled as she touched her throat, remembering the cold. "I thought I was dying." "You nearly did. But the Lord had other plans, it seems." Mrs. Cooper's kind eyes hardened slightly, and so did those who left you there. The door opened, and Sarah instinctively tensed. A tall man entered, broad-shouldered, wearing a ranch owner's good clothes, but with a worker's calloused hands. His eyes met hers, deep brown and concerned. "Good morning, Mom," he said softly, keeping his distance. "I'm Colton Reed." Sarah studied him, this stranger who had saved her life. He wasn't what she'd expected of a wealthy rancher. There was no arrogance in his stance, no assumption of authority. He waited patiently while she found her voice. "Sarah Mitchell," she managed. "I thank you for saving my life." He nodded, pulling a chair closer but not too close. "Can you tell us what happened? We found your journal pages, but the Blackwoods," she said, her voice stronger now. They didn't like that I refused James's proposal. Mrs. Cooper made a sound of disgust. That man's no better than a rattlesnake. They said a widow has no place alone, Sarah continued, that I was being prideful, refusing to remarry. But James, I saw how he treated his first wife. I couldn't. You don't need to explain, Colton interrupted gently. No woman should be forced to marry against her will. Sarah touched her wedding ring, drawing strength from it. They came at night. Elder Thompson said they were doing God's work, teaching me humility. A bitter laugh escaped her. They left me to freeze to show me how much I needed them. Colton's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The Blackwoods and their kind don't come to Reedland. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Mrs. Cooper cut in. This house could use another woman's touch, unless you've got somewhere else to go. Sarah thought of her little cabin, probably already claimed by the settlers. All her possessions, her memories of Thomas, gone. No, she whispered. I have nowhere. Then it's settled, Colton said. Rest now. Get your strength back. We can talk more later about what you want to do. As he turned to leave, Sarah called. Out, Mr. Reed. He paused at the door. Why are you helping me? He was quiet for a moment, considering. Because it's right, he finally said. And because no one deserves to be punished for choosing their own path. After he left, Mrs. Cooper helped Sarah sit up properly, propping her with pillows. He's a good man, the older woman said. His parents raised him right before the fever. Took them. Built this ranch from almost nothing, treats his hands fair, helps folks who need it. Sarah watched sunlight play across the quilted blanket covering her. The Blackwoods won't let this go, she said quietly. They'll come looking. Eventually. Let them. Mrs. Cooper's voice was steel. They'll find more than a helpless widow this time. Sarah closed her eyes, exhausted, but feeling safer than she had since Thomas died. The medicine bottle clinked as Mrs. Cooper measured out another dose. Outside, she could hear men working. Horses nickering, the ordinary sounds of ranch life continuing, as if she hadn't just fallen into the middle of it like a stone in a still pond. But for the first time in months, she felt something like hope. Whether it came from the safety of these walls or the quiet strength of the man who'd saved her, she couldn't say. But it was there, fragile as a spring flower pushing through snow. The letter arrived a week after Sarah's rescue, delivered by a nervous boy from town who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Jenkins found it nailed to the ranch's main gate, the paper thick and expensive, the kind the Blackwoods used for their church. Announcements. Sarah's hands shook as she read it in Colton's study. The Lord does not look kindly on those who harbor the prideful. Return what was rightfully cast out, or bear the consequences of divine judgment. Colton took the letter from her trembling fingers, his face darkening as he read. Divine judgment, he muttered. They dress up murder in Scripture and call it God's will. They won't stop, Sarah said quietly. The Blackwoods have always used the settlement's faith to control people, those who don't bend, break. Like James's first wife? Sarah nodded. Mary Blackwood. She tried to leave him once. They found her body in the creek 2 days later. Everyone knew, but no one would speak against the family. Jenkins cleared his throat from the doorway. Riders spotted in the north pasture, Mr. Reed, just watching, but they're armed. Double the patrols, Colton ordered. No one works alone, until further notice. After Jenkins left, Sarah stood by the window, watching snow fall in the gathering dusk. I should go. I'm bringing danger to your door. You're bringing nothing, Colton said firmly. They're the ones choosing violence, but your ranch, your people, can handle ourselves. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. This isn't the first time we've dealt with threats. The Blackwoods are different. They have the whole settlement behind them. Elder Thompson's word is law there. This is Reed land, Colton replied. The only law here is justice. That evening, Mrs. Cooper found Sarah in the kitchen, compulsively, cleaning already spotless dishes. The older woman didn't speak, just pulled out her knitting and settled into her chair by the stove. I used to think I was strong, Sarah finally said. When Thomas died, I faced it. When the settlement whispered about me living alone, I held my head high. But now you're tired of being strong? Mrs. Cooper's needles clicked steadily. Good! Means you're smart enough to know when to let others help carry the load. A horse's whinny cut through the night, followed by shouts from the bunkhouse. Sarah's heart jumped, but Mrs. Cooper remained calm. Just the night watch changing, she said, though I expect we'll be hearing more commotion in the coming days. How can you be so calm? Mrs. Cooper set down her knitting. Child, I've been on this ranch 20 years, seen rustlers, angry neighbors, and men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. The Blackwoods may hide behind the Bible, but they're just bullies with fancy words. A shadow crossed the kitchen window, one of the ranch hands on patrol. Sarah watched him pass, rifle ready. I never wanted anyone else hurt because of me. No one ever does. Mrs. Cooper resumed her knitting. But sometimes standing alone isn't brave. It's just prideful in a different way. Later that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The letter's threats echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of Mary Blackwood's bruised face and the cold of Thunder Valley. She wrapped herself in a shawl and wandered to the study. Colton was there, studying maps of the ranch by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, but didn't seem surprised to see her. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Too many ghosts tonight. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Pull up a chair. Company's welcome. She sat, watching him mark defensive positions. On the map, his hands were steady, his planning methodical. This was a man used to protecting what was his. Why did you really help me? She asked suddenly. The truth. Colton set down his pencil, considering her question. When I found you in the snow, something in me knew I couldn't ride past, not just because it was right, but because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, because I recognized something in you, the kind of strength that makes cruel men afraid. Their eyes met across the desk, and something shifted in the lamplight between them, a recognition perhaps, or a possibility neither was ready to name. The moment broke as Jenkins knocked, bringing news of more riders near the property line. But Sarah carried the warmth of it with her through the long night, a shield against the growing shadows. Sarah found her place in the ranch's rhythm gradually, like water finding its course. It started in the kitchen, where Mrs. Cooper's old cookbook lay open on the counter each morning. The leather-bound volume was worn with use, its pages spotted, with decades of cooking stains, each recipe telling its own story of ranch life. My mother taught me to make bread like this, Sarah said one morning, her hands deep in dough. The familiar motions brought comfort, memories of happier times. Mrs. Cooper watched approvingly. Good. These men need more than my cooking. Been serving them the same dishes for 20 years. The ranch hands noticed the change at supper time. Fresh bread still warm from the oven, stews with flavors they hadn't tasted since their mother's kitchens. Word spread quickly. The widow could cook. Never had biscuits this light, Jenkins declared, reaching for his third. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Cooper. No pardon needed. Truth is truth. Colton found Sarah there most mornings, flour on her cheeks, humming as she worked. He tried not to stare, but something about her presence made the kitchen feel more like a home than it had in years. You don't have to earn your keep, he said one day, watching her roll out pie crust. You know that, right? She paused, considering. I know, but I want to. Keeping busy, it helps, he understood. Idle hands left too much time for darker thoughts, for remembering threats that still lurked beyond the ranch's boundaries. Every day brought reports of settlers watching the property, testing the edges of reed land. But in the kitchen, with sunlight streaming through windows and the smell of baking bread in the air, those threats seemed distant. Sarah's confidence grew with each successful dish, each word of praise from the ranch hands. She started keeping her own notebook, jotting down recipes and modifications. Mrs. Cooper found her one evening, comparing her notes to the old cookbook. Making it your own, the older woman observed. Is that all right? More than all right. Place needs to grow, same as people. The kitchen became Sarah's sanctuary, but not her prison. She ventured out more each day, learning the ranch's routines. The hands tipped their hats respectfully when she passed, no longer whispering about the mysterious widow. One crisp morning, she walked to the corral where Colton was working with a young horse. She watched him move with the animal, gentle but firm, building trust through patience. "Beautiful creature," she said when he finished. "Want to meet her?" He held out his hand. Sarah hesitated only a moment before accepting. The mare sniffed her palm curiously as Colton guided her closer. "She's learning to trust again," he explained. "Previous owner was too rough with her." The parallel wasn't lost on Sarah. "How do you know she won't always be afraid?" "You don't, but you give her reason to believe in better things." His hand was warm over hers as they stroked the mare's neck. "Time and patience do the rest." That evening, as Sarah kneaded bread for the next day, she thought about trust and time, about hands that helped instead of hurt. The cookbook lay open beside her, but she barely needed it now. Her body remembered the rhythms, just as it was, learning new ones. Mrs. Cooper came in, bringing the scent of cold air with her. "Riders spotted up near Thunder Creek," she said quietly. Jenkins sent word. Sarah's hands stilled in the dough. "The Blackwoods. They're kind, just watching. For now." She nodded, resuming her kneading with perhaps more force than necessary. The cookbook's pages rustled in a draft, and she automatically reached to smooth them. "Should I be doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Making myself at home here, when it might all what? End?" Mrs. Cooper sat in her chair, by the stove. "Child, everything might end. Doesn't mean we stop living while we can." Sarah looked around the kitchen, her workspace now as much as anyone's. Steam rose from pots on the stove. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and tomorrow's bread waited to be shaped by her hands. "I thought I'd lost everything," she said softly. "In that snow. But here I am, making bread like nothing's changed." "Everything's changed," Mrs. Cooper corrected. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're living. That's what really scares them, you know, the ones who tried to break you." Sarah touched the cookbook's worn pages, thinking of all the women who'd cooked from it before her, adding their own notes, their own wisdom. She was part of that story now, whether the future held peace or storm. "Then let them be scared," she said, and reached for the flour bin. The broken fence post was discovered at dawn. Jenkins found it during his morning patrol, not just fallen, but deliberately smashed. Deep boot prints in the mud showed it was no accident, and the crude cross carved into the wood left no doubt. "About the message. Blackwoods," he said grimly when Colton arrived to inspect the damage. "Must have come in the night. Those tracks lead back toward the settlement." Sarah stood a few paces back, wrapping her shawl tight against the morning. Chill. The splintered wood reminded her too much of her own cabin's broken door the night they'd taken her. "They're getting bolder," Colton observed, running his hand along the jagged edges. "Testing our response." More ranch hands gathered, their faces hard as they surveyed the damage. Word had spread about why Sarah was at the ranch, and the men had taken it personally. This wasn't just an attack on property, it was a challenge to their collective honor. "Want us to ride to the settlement?" asked Mike Harris, one of the younger hands. "Show them we don't take kindly to vandals?" "No," Colton's voice was firm. "That's what they want, to draw us into something they can twist into justification." Sarah stepped forward, touching the crude cross. "They'll say it's God's will. That's how they operate, every cruelty wrapped in scripture." "God's will or not," Jenkins said, "we need to strengthen our patrols. They got too close this time." Colton nodded. "Double the night watch. No one rides alone, even during daylight." He turned to Sarah. "And you stay close to the house." She wanted to protest, to say she wouldn't live in fear, but the broken fence post spoke louder than pride. These weren't just threats anymore. This was a promise of violence to come. Back at the house, Mrs. Cooper was waiting with coffee and concern. "Heard about the fence," she said, pressing a cup into Sarah's cold hands. "Cowards striking in the dark." "They'll come in daylight soon enough," Sarah replied. James Blackwood isn't known for patience. As if summoned by his name, a rider appeared at the edge of the ranch's main pasture. Even at a distance, the man's posture radiated arrogance. "Speak of the devil," Mrs. Cooper muttered, moving to the window. Colton and Jenkins rode out to meet him, keeping the ranch house between the stranger and Sarah. Through the window, she could see the conversation growing heated. James Blackwood, for it was him, gesturing angrily, while Colton sat his horse with deadly stillness. "I should go out there," Sarah said. "Face him." "You'll do no such thing." Mrs. Cooper's tone brooked no argument. "That's exactly what he wants." The confrontation ended with Blackwood wheeling his horse around, spraying mud in his fury. But before he rode off, he turned and stared directly at the house, as if he could see Sarah through the walls. That evening, Colton called a meeting in the main room. The hands crowded in, their usual easy manner replaced by grim determination. Blackwood delivered his message. Colton began. "Says we're harboring a woman who needs correction. Says the settlement won't stand for it." Angry mutters filled the room. Sarah, sitting in the corner with Mrs. Cooper, felt the weight of every eye occasionally turning her way. "He gave us 3 days," Colton continued. "Said after that, they'll come to retrieve God's lost lamb." His voice dripped contempt at the phrasing. "Let them come," Mike said, echoed by several others. "They will." Colton's gaze swept the room. "But we'll be ready. Jenkins has a plan." The foreman stepped forward, detailing new patrol routes and defensive positions. Sarah listened with a growing mix of gratitude and guilt. These men were preparing to fight for her, possibly die for her. Later, unable to sleep, she found Colton in his study again. The broken fence post lay on his desk, its crude cross facing up. "I won't run," she said before he could speak. "Not this time." He looked up, shadows under his eyes, but determination in his face. "Good, because I won't let them take you." Something in his voice made her heart skip. It wasn't just protection he was offering. It was a promise deeper than words. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" He stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some people are worth any risk. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk and just as strong. Then a dog barked in the distance, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. But something had changed, as irreversible as the broken fence post on his desk. The line between protector and something more had blurred, and neither of them could pretend they didn't feel it. The old newspaper clipping fell from between the cookbook's pages, yellowed with age, but still readable. Sarah picked it up carefully, smoothing its creased surface. The headline caught her eye. "Tragedy at Black River Settlement. Pastor's wife. Found dead." Her hands trembled as she read. The article was 15 years old, detailing the death of Rebecca Thompson, Elder Thompson's first wife. The official story claimed accident, a fall from a horse. But between the lines, Sarah read a darker truth. "I see you found it," Mrs. Cooper said from the doorway. "Been keeping that safe all these years. You knew about Rebecca. Everyone knew, but nobody talked. Same as with Mary Blackwood years later." The older woman sat heavily. "Those men, they've been hiding their sins behind scripture for a long time." Sarah read further, details jumping out. Rebecca had been seen with bruises. She'd spoken to the local marshal about concerns. Then, suddenly, a tragic accident. "Why keep this?" "Evidence," Mrs. Cooper replied, "for the day someone was brave enough to stand up to them." The kitchen door opened and Colton entered, his expression grim. "Sarah, there's something you need to know." She held up the clipping. "About Rebecca Thompson." He paused, surprised. "That's part of it. But there's more." He pulled out a chair. "My father knew Rebecca. She came to him for help just before she died." Sarah's breath caught. "What happened?" "Father offered her sanctuary like we're offering you. But she was afraid, went back to make peace with Thompson." His jaw tightened. "They found her body 2 days later." "Your father tried to help," Sarah said softly. and Thompson never forgave him. When the fever took my parents the next year, he called it divine punishment. Colton's eyes held old pain. That's the real reason they hate this ranch. We represent everything they can't control. Mrs. Cooper made a sound of disgust. Those men, playing at being God's servants while dealing in death. Sarah stood, pacing the kitchen. Rebecca, Mary, how many others? All these women, silenced by men who claim to speak for God. Too many, Colton agreed, but you're different. You survived. You can speak for those who couldn't. If I live long enough. You will. His voice carried absolute conviction. We won't let history repeat itself. Sarah touched the newspaper, clipping, thinking of all the women who'd lived and died under the settlement's shadow. Her own sister had married into a similar community back east. She hadn't heard from her in years. When Thomas was alive, she said slowly, he used to say that evil thrives when good people stay quiet. I never truly understood until now. Colton moved closer, his presence steady and reassuring. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man. He was. He taught school, believed in education for everyone, even girls. The settlement never liked that either. She smiled sadly. Maybe that's why they were so eager to be rid of his widow. Tell me about him, Colton said gently. Sarah sank back into her chair, memories washing over her. He loved books, poetry, said the frontier needed beauty as much as it needed strength. When he got sick, she swallowed hard. He made me promise to live fully, not just survive. You're keeping that promise, Mrs. Cooper observed. Every day you stand against them. A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of ranch life. Sarah studied Colton's face, seeing the same quiet strength she'd loved in Thomas, but something else too, a fire that called to her own. We should go through my journals, she said finally. Write down everything I remember about the settlement, about Mary and the others. If we survive this, when we survive this, Colton corrected, when we survive this, someone needs to know the truth. All of it. Mrs. Cooper stood, her joints creaking. I'll fetch your journals. And Sarah? She paused at the door. Rebecca would be proud, they all would. Left alone with Colton, Sarah felt the weight of unspoken words between them. He moved to the window, looking out at his land, at the life he'd built from his parents' legacy. I couldn't save Rebecca, he said quietly. I was too young, too far away. But I've carried that failure every day since. It wasn't your failure, Sarah replied. You were a child. Maybe, but I'm not a child anymore. He turned to face her. And I swear to you, as long as I'm breathing, they won't add your name to that list of silent women. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift inside her, like winter giving way to spring, like hope taking root in frozen ground. Thomas would understand, she thought. He'd want her to live, to love again, to fight for what was right. The newspaper clipping lay between them on the table, a reminder of the past they couldn't change. But the future, that was still unwritten. The hand-carved chess set had belonged to Colton's father, each piece worn smooth by years of contemplative touches. Sarah ran her fingers over the queen, feeling the subtle grain of the wood as evening settled around the ranch house. Your move, Colton said softly, watching her from across the board. They'd fallen into this routine over the past few nights. A quiet game after supper, while Mrs. Cooper knitted by the fire and the night watch patrolled outside. The approaching danger made these peaceful moments more precious. Thomas taught me to play, Sarah said, moving her bishop. He said chess was like life. You have to think ahead but be ready for anything. Wise man. Colton studied the board. He'd be proud of how you've handled everything. Would he? She couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, putting all of you at risk. Colton's hand paused over a pawn. Is that what you think this is? Selfishness? I don't know what to think anymore. She watched the firelight play across his features. Everything's changed so much. He made his move, capturing her knight. Change isn't always bad. Their eyes met across the board, and Sarah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. It should have felt like betrayal, these growing feelings for another man. But somehow it felt right. like her heart was large enough to honor both her past love and this new, unexpected warmth. "I used to pray for guidance," she admitted. "Now I'm not sure I trust prayers anymore, after seeing how the settlement twists them." "God's bigger than their narrow version," Colton said. "My mother used to say that true faith was like this ranch, wild and free and sometimes dangerous, but always real." Sarah moved her queen, seeing too late it was a mistake. Colton's hand brushed hers as he took the piece, and neither pulled away immediately. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Not of them, exactly, but of feeling this much, of having something to lose again." Mrs. Cooper had dozed off in her chair, her knitting needles still in her lap. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. "Sarah." Colton's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "Having something. To lose means having something worth fighting for. That's not weakness. It's the strongest thing there is." He stood, moving around the table to her side. Carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, he took her hand. "I know it's too soon," he said. "I know you're still healing. But I need you to know that whatever comes, whatever you decide, you have a place here, with us." Sarah looked at their joined hands, feeling the calluses on his fingers, the strength and gentleness in his grip. She thought of Thomas, of his last words to her. "Live, my love. Really live." Slowly she stood, keeping hold of Colton's hand. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said honestly, "but I know I feel safe here, with you." He lifted his free hand to her cheek, thumb gently brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "That's enough for now." The moment stretched, tender and fragile. Then, with the same care he showed his horses, Colton leaned down and pressed, his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, gentle, a question more than a demand. When they parted, Sarah rested her forehead against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. Outside, a ranch hand's boots crunched on frozen ground. A dog barked in the distance, and somewhere an owl called into the night. The ordinary. Sounds of life continuing, even as everything changed. "The Blackwoods come tomorrow," she murmured. "Let them come." His arms tightened protectively around her. "We face it together." In her chair, Mrs. Cooper smiled secretly, her eyes still closed, her knitting forgotten in her lap. Sometimes she knew the best medicine for a wounded heart was the promise of a new dawn. The chess pieces stood forgotten on the board, the carved queen lying on her side but not defeated. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight was for this quiet revelation, this gentle unfurling of possibility. Sarah thought of Thomas, of his love for poetry and beauty. He would understand, she knew, that love wasn't a finite thing, that the heart could expand to hold both memory and hope. Tomorrow she would face her enemies standing tall, stronger for having known two good men in her life. The fire burned low, but neither Sarah nor Colton moved to rekindle it. Some warmths came from within, and no winter wind could touch them. Marshal Wade Duncan arrived at the ranch just after sunrise, his badge catching the early light. He was a tall man, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice to trust easy solutions. "Quite a situation you've got here." "Reed," he said, dismounting in the yard. "Elder Thompson's been to my office. Says you're harboring a fugitive." Colton stood his ground, one hand resting near his gun. "She's no fugitive, Marshal. She's a widow they tried to murder. So I've heard." Duncan's eyes swept the ranch, noting the armed men on patrol. "Also heard the Blackwoods are planning something. That's why I'm here." Sarah watched from the porch, her heart pounding. The marshal's badge represented law, order, protection, but she'd learned the hard way that such symbols didn't always mean safety. "Show him," Colton said over his shoulder to her. "Show him everything." She brought out her journal, the newspaper clipping about Rebecca Thompson, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. Duncan read through it all, his weathered face growing grimmer with each page. "Damn," he muttered. "I always suspected, but they covered their tracks well. Thompson's got half the territory's judges in his pocket. So you won't help? Sarah couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Didn't say that. Duncan handed back the papers. Law's one thing. Justice is another. Sometimes they don't line up as neat as they should. He turned to Colton. I can't officially take sides, but I can tell you the Blackwoods have been gathering men, and I can tell you I'll be patrolling this area heavy for the next few days. Understood, Marshal? Colton's voice held respect and recognition of the careful line Duncan was walking. As the Marshal mounted up, he paused. Miss Mitchell, what they did leaving you to die, that's murder in my book, whether it worked or not. You remember that if things get rough. After he rode away, Sarah stood close to Colton, watching dust settle on the trail. Was that a warning or a blessing? Both, I think. He squeezed her hand. He's giving us room to defend ourselves. The day turned tense with waiting. Ranch hands cleaned their rifles openly now, and Mrs. Cooper packed medical supplies where they could be quickly reached. Just in case, she said, but her eyes were worried. By afternoon, word came from town. The Blackwoods had closed their store early. Riders were gathering at the settlement. Tonight, Jenkins predicted, they'll come at dark. Sarah found herself in the kitchen, methodically kneading bread she knew might never be baked. The familiar motion helped calm her nerves. I should send you away, Colton said from the doorway. Get you somewhere safe until this blows over. No, she didn't look up from her work. I'm done running, done being the victim in their story. He crossed to her, flour dusting his black coat as he pulled her close. I know, but I had to offer. She breathed in his scent, leather and pine and gun smoke. Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know, don't. His voice was rough. Tell me after, when we've won. The sun set blood red that evening. Ranch hands took their positions, and Mrs. Cooper loaded a shotgun with practiced ease. My Henry gave me this before he died, she said, seeing Sarah's surprise. Said a woman alone needs to be her own protection sometimes. Sarah touched her wedding ring, thinking of Thomas. Of all the women who died under the settlement's shadow, she wouldn't be one of them, not tonight. The marshal's badge had shown her something important, that even the law knew the difference between what was legal and what was right. Tonight, she would stand with these people who'd become her family, defending not just her life, but her right to live it fully. In the growing darkness, she heard Colton giving final instructions to his men. His voice carried authority and care, a leader who knew he was asking his people to risk everything for what was right. Their eyes met across the yard, and in that moment, Sarah felt the last chains of fear fall away. Whatever came with the night, she was exactly where she belonged. The first warning shot split the darkness an hour after sunset. The rifle felt strange in Sarah's hands. A man's weapon, Thomas would have said. But Thomas wasn't here, and the night was filled with shouts and gunfire. From her position by the upstairs window, she could see shadows moving at the edge of the ranch's lamplight. They're trying to spook the horses, Jenkins called from below. Circle around to the barn. The settlers had come in force. She counted at least 20 mounted men. James Blackwood's voice carried across the yard, thick with righteous fury. Send out the widow, Reed. Don't make us take her. Colton's response cracked like a whip. Try it and see what happens. A bullet splintered the window frame beside Sarah. She didn't flinch. Fear had burned away, leaving only cold determination. When the next shot came, she returned fire, just as Colton had taught her. A cry of pain told her she'd found her. Mark, that's our girl. Mrs. Cooper muttered from nearby, her own shotgun ready. Show them you're not helpless anymore. The battle spread across the ranch like wildfire. Settlers tried to break through in waves, but Colton had positioned his men well. Every approach was covered, every advantage used. The ranch hands fought with the coordination of men who'd worked together for years, protecting what was theirs. Sarah moved from window to window, offering covering fire where needed. She saw Mike Harris take a bullet to the shoulder, but keep fighting. Watched Jenkins lead a countercharge that drove back a group trying to fire the barn. Through it all, Colton's voice kept them steady, directing the defense. Then she saw him, Elder Thompson himself, hanging back in the shadows, watching his men die for his cause. The sight filled her with fury. This man who'd wrapped murder in scripture, who'd killed his own wife and called it God's will. "I see him," she said to Mrs. Cooper, "the coward's letting others do his dirty work." "Like always," the older woman spat. "Men like that never risk themselves." A new volley of gunfire drew their attention. The settlers had regrouped, and this time they came with purpose. James Blackwood led them, charging straight for the house. "They're making their push," Jenkins shouted. "Hold the line!" Sarah took careful aim at Blackwood, but a rider crossed her shot. The bullet meant for him took another man from his saddle instead. The sight made her stomach turn, but there was no time for regret. The world narrowed to simple things. The weight of the rifle, the smell of powder, the thunder of hooves and guns. She lost track of time, moving and shooting by instinct now. At some point, she realized she was praying, not to the settlers' vengeful God, but to whatever power watched over good people fighting for their lives. A scream cut through the chaos. Mike Harris again, this time thrown from his horse. Sarah saw James Blackwood bearing down on him, rope in hand. Without thinking, she ran downstairs and out onto the porch. Her first shot went wide, but the second caught Blackwood's horse in the flank. The animal reared, throwing its rider hard against a fence post. "Sarah, get back inside!" Colton appeared beside her, gun blazing at the men trying to reach their fallen leader. "No!" She stood her ground. "I won't hide anymore." Together they held the porch, forcing the settlers back. Sarah felt Colton's presence beside her like a wall of strength, matching her shot for shot. In that moment, she understood what real partnership meant. Not ownership or submission, but standing together against whatever came. The tide turned. With Blackwood's fall, without their leader, the settlers' courage faltered. Elder Thompson, seeing the battle lost, was the first to retreat. Others followed, leaving their wounded behind. "Let them run," Colton ordered when some of his men would have pursued. "We've made our point." Dawn was breaking by the time the last shots faded. Sarah looked at the destruction, broken fences, wounded men, blood on the snow. The cost had been high, but they'd held. Mrs. Cooper was already tending the injured, ordering men around with brisk efficiency. Mike Harris would live, though. His arm would need time to heal. 2 settlers lay dead, and several more wounded were being treated with the same care as their own. "Because we're not them," Colton said when Sarah questioned this. "We don't let men die if we can help it, even enemies." She leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. "They'll come back. Maybe, but they know now what it means to fight people who stand together." He touched her cheek, gentle despite the gunpowder staining his hands. "You were magnificent," she thought, of the woman she'd been just weeks ago, afraid and alone in the snow. That woman was gone, transformed by love and courage, and the discovery of her own strength. "We all were," she said, watching the sun rise over their battered but unbroken home. In the quiet days that followed the battle, dried wildflowers appeared on the ranch house windowsills. Sarah found them each morning: prairie roses, sage blossoms, late autumn daisies. Mrs. Cooper said the ranch hands were leaving them their rough way of showing support for the woman who'd fought beside them. The injured men recovered slowly. Mike Harris bore his wound with pride, telling anyone who'd listen how Sarah had saved him from Blackwood. His arm would heal crooked, but he claimed it was worth it. "Got my own battle scar now," he joked from his sickbed. "Ladies love those, right?" Sarah changed his bandages daily, fighting guilt each time she saw the wound. "I'm sorry you were hurt because of me, Miss Sarah," he said seriously. "I've taken bullets for a lot less worthy causes. This one I'm proud of." The ranch slowly repaired itself. Broken fences were mended, bullet holes patched, bloodstains washed away by rain. But other changes lingered, deeper, permanent ones. The ranch hands moved differently now, more alert, always watching the horizon. And Sarah found herself studying every visitor with wary eyes, measuring them for threat. She found Colton one evening in the barn, tending to his horse's battle wounds. Shadow had taken a graze across his flank, nothing serious but enough to leave a scar. "Like master, like mount," she said, touching the bandage on Colton's arm where a bullet had found him during the fight. "We heal," he replied, understanding she meant more than just physical wounds. "That's what matters." She helped him change Shadow's dressing, their hands working together with practiced ease. The horse stood quietly, trusting them despite his pain. Trust, Sarah had learned, was its own kind of healing. "The marshal rode by today," she said, "while you were checking the north pasture." Colton's hands stilled. What did he want? "To tell us James Blackwood's still alive. He's hurt bad, but he'll recover." She stroked Shadow's neck, drawing comfort from the warm hide. "They're gathering at the settlement again. Let them gather." Colton's voice was steel. "We'll be ready." But readiness, Sarah knew, carried its own cost. She saw it in Mrs. Cooper's face when she counted their ammunition, in Jenkins' eyes when he trained new men to replace those who'd left after the fighting. The ranch was becoming a fortress, and part of her mourned that necessity. That night, she couldn't sleep. The full moon painted silver shadows across her bed, and every rustle of wind sounded like approaching riders. She found herself in the kitchen, seeking comfort in familiar tasks. The dried wildflowers caught her eye, arranged in a jar by the window. Their colors had faded, but their beauty remained, transformed rather than diminished. Like her, she thought. Like all of them, Mrs. Cooper found her there staring at the flowers. Without a word, the older woman put on coffee and sat with her. "I never thanked you," Sarah said finally, "for teaching me to be strong again. Child, you were always strong. You just needed to remember it." Mrs. Cooper poured 2 cups. "And you've taught us a thing or two as well." "About what?" "About standing up, about choosing what's right over what's easy." She sipped her coffee. "About love, too, though you might not know it." Sarah thought of Colton, of how natural it felt now to fight beside him, to build something worth defending. "I'm not sure I know anything about love anymore." "Sure you do. Love's what makes us heal when we think we can't. Makes us fight when we think we're beaten." Mrs. Cooper's eyes were kind. "Makes us plant flowers in the middle of war." Dawn found them still talking, sharing coffee and memories and quiet hopes for the future. Outside, the ranch hands were already starting their day, their voices carrying on the morning air. Sarah heard laughter among them, proof that joy could survive even in uncertain times. Later, walking to check on Mike, she passed the spot where James Blackwood had fallen. New grass was already growing there, covering the blood-stained earth. Nature itself seemed determined to heal, to go on living despite human conflicts. She picked a late wildflower growing through a fence rail and added it to the kitchen jar. Its petals were bright against the dried blooms, a reminder that beauty could come in many forms, at many times. The ranch was different now, marked by battle but not broken by it. And so was she, scarred perhaps but stronger for the healing. The legal documents arrived by special courier, affidavits, testimonies, and official records that Marshal Duncan had been quietly gathering. Sarah spread them across Colton's desk, each paper adding another piece to the settler's dark history. 3 more women, she said, voice tight with anger. All dead in accidents after speaking against the settlement, and those are just the ones with records. Colton studied a death certificate, his jaw clenched. Martha Blackwood's sister among them. Fell downstairs after threatening to expose James's gambling debts. The evidence painted a damning picture. Years of corruption, covered-up crimes and systematic abuse, all hidden behind the settlement's respectable facade. The marshal had done his work well, following money trails and collecting statements from those who'd fled the settlement over the years. Thompson's been bribing judges, he'd told them when he delivered the papers. But even corrupt men have limits. These deaths, the attempted murder of Mrs. Mitchell, it's too much to ignore now. A knock at the study door revealed Jenkins, bringing more news. "Riders from town, sir. Says there's trouble at the settlement. They found out the details soon enough." James Blackwood, still recovering from his injuries, had turned on Elder Thompson. The two men's accusations against each other had sparked a schism in the settlement, with families taking sides and old grievances surfacing. "They're eating their own now," Mrs. Cooper observed grimly. "Truth has a way of doing that." Sarah watched from the porch as more riders arrived. Families, fleeing the settlement's chaos, seeking refuge at the ranch. Among them was Martha Blackwood herself, her face bruised but her head held high. "James tried to kill me," she said when Sarah met her at the gate, "just like he killed Mary, just like they tried to kill you." Her hands shook as she gripped her horse's reins. "I should have spoken up years ago. Maybe those other women would still be alive." Sarah helped her down, seeing not the proud woman who'd sneered at her in Thunder Valley, but another victim of the settlement's poison. "You're speaking now. That's what matters." The ranch became a gathering point for those breaking free from the settlement's control. Each refugee brought new evidence, new testimonies. Marshal Duncan worked tirelessly, building a case that not even corrupted judges could ignore. "It's not just about justice for the dead anymore," he told them. "It's about protecting the living." Colton organized space for the refugees, turning the barn into temporary housing. Sarah watched him work, seeing how naturally he took on the role of protector for these broken people. "Not everyone would do this," she said that evening as they reviewed the latest statements, "taking in people who were enemies just days ago." "They were never really our enemies," he replied. "They were prisoners who didn't know they were caged." The legal papers grew into stacks, then boxes, stories of theft, extortion, and violence spanning decades. Sarah spent hours recording testimonies, her hand cramping as she wrote, but her resolve unwavering. Martha Blackwood proved especially valuable, revealing details of her brother's crimes that even the marshal hadn't uncovered. "James always kept records," she explained. "His insurance against Thompson turning on him. I know where they're hidden." The revelation sent ripples through the territory. When Marshal Duncan returned from the settlement with James Blackwood's ledgers, even he looked shaken by what they contained. "This goes beyond the territory," he said. "Federal prosecutors are interested now. Thompson and Blackwood weren't just killing women. They were stealing land, laundering money through the church, blackmailing officials." Sarah thought of Thomas, of his belief in justice and truth. "He used to say that evil thrives in darkness," she told Colton that night. "That bringing things to light was half the battle." "Your Thomas was a wise man," he responded, taking her. "And you're honoring his memory by finishing what he believed in." The documents on the desk seemed to glow in the lamplight, paper weapons in a war for justice. Sarah touched them gently, thinking of all the women whose stories they contained. They would have voices at last, even if they couldn't speak for themselves anymore. "We're not just fighting for ourselves now," she realized. "We're fighting for everyone who couldn't." Colton's hand tightened on hers. "And this time," he promised, "we're going to win." Elder Thompson's pocket watch ticked loudly in the pre-dawn silence, its gold case reflecting lamplight as he placed it carefully on his desk. The settlement was in chaos, but he took this moment to maintain his routine, as if clinging to ceremony, could hold back the tide of justice approaching. At the Reed Ranch, Sarah watched the sunrise, knowing this day would change everything. Marshal Duncan had ridden in late the previous night with news. Federal agents were on their way, but Thompson wouldn't wait for them. "He's gathering what's left of his loyal men," Duncan had reported. "They mean to end this before the law arrives." Colton's pocket watch showed 6 a.m. when the first warning came. Jenkins rode in hard from the north boundary, his horse lathered. With effort, "They're coming! At least 30 men, Thompson leading them himself this time." The ranch mobilized with practiced efficiency. Refugees were moved to the storm cellar, armed men took their positions, and Sarah found herself back at the upstairs window, rifle ready. But something felt different this time. They weren't just defending themselves now, they were standing for justice itself. "Thompson's desperate," Colton said, checking his weapons. "That makes him dangerous." "Desperate men make mistakes," Sarah replied. touching the watch he'd given her to coordinate their defense. "And we're ready for them." The settlers came with the rising sun at their backs, Thompson's voice carrying across the morning air. "This is God's judgment, Reed. You've harbored evil, and now you'll pay the price. Only judgment coming is from the law, Thompson." Colton's reply was steady. "Federal agents are on their way. It's over." "Nothing's over while I draw breath." The battle erupted with new fury. Thompson's men fought like fanatics, believing their leader's promises of divine protection, but the ranch defenders had something stronger than faith. They had truth on their side. Sarah moved between positions, coordinating with Mrs. Cooper to supply ammunition where needed. Through her scope, she saw Thompson hanging back again, letting others die for his cause. But this time, she was ready. "Martha," she called to the woman who'd once condemned her to die. "It's time." Martha. Blackwood stepped onto the porch, her voice cutting through the gunfire. "Edward Thompson, face me and answer for Mary's death, for Rebecca's, for all of them." The effect was electric. Thompson's men hesitated, hearing one of their own name their sins. Martha continued, her accusations carrying to every corner of the battlefield. "I saw you push Rebecca down those stairs, saw you help James cover up Mary's murder. How many more deaths on your hands, Elder?" Some of Thompson's men began to lower their weapons. Others looked uncertainly at their leader, seeing him perhaps for the first time as he truly was. Thompson's composure cracked with a roar of rage. He spurred his horse forward, firing wildly at the woman exposing his crimes. But Sarah was ready. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The fighting stuttered to a halt as Thompson fell. In the sudden quiet, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Marshal Duncan appeared with a dozen deputies and federal agents, their badges glinting in the morning sun. "Edward Thompson," the marshal called out, "you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and too many other crimes to name here." Thompson struggled to his feet, blood staining his fine coat. For a moment, he looked like he might resist. Then, his shoulders sagged, decades of authority draining away. "You've destroyed everything," he snarled at Sarah. "No," she replied, standing tall on the porch. "You did that yourself. I just brought it into the light." His remaining men surrendered. Without further fight, as the agents led Thompson away, Sarah checked her watch. Not even 7 a.m., and a generation of corruption had finally met justice. Colton found her later by the gate, watching the federal agents escort their prisoners toward town. "You ended it," he said softly. "We ended it," she corrected, "all of us together." She looked at the watch in her hand, thinking of Thompson's gold timepiece and all it represented. Power, corruption, the illusion of control. Her own watch was simpler, a working tool given in love and trust. The morning sun cleared the horizon, throwing long shadows behind them but lighting the path ahead. Like time itself, justice had moved forward, unstoppable once set in motion. The marriage license lay on Colton's desk, its official letterhead stark against the worn wood. Sarah traced the blank lines where their names would go, remembering another such document from what felt like a lifetime ago. "Are you sure?" Colton asked softly from the doorway. "No one would blame you if you needed more time." She turned to face him, seeing the love and uncertainty in his eyes. The past month had transformed the ranch. Thompson and his core followers were in federal custody. The settlement was being reorganized under new leadership, and refugees were slowly finding their way back to normal lives. "I've had time," she said. "Time to mourn, time to heal, time to learn who I am beyond survival." She touched the license gently. "And time to know what I want." The morning sun streamed through the study windows, catching the ring Colton had given her the night before. It was different from her first wedding ring, not better or worse, just different, like the love it represented. "Thomas would understand," she continued, voicing the thought that had brought her peace. "He wanted me to live, really live, not just exist in his memory." Colton crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I've been thinking about my parents too, about how they built this place on love and justice." His thumbs traced her knuckles. about how you helped make it that again. Outside, the ranch was coming alive with morning activity. But this wasn't the tense preparation of recent months. These were the sounds of peace, of work, and purpose, and community. Marshal Duncan sent word, Colton said. The federal judge sentenced Thompson yesterday. He'll never hurt anyone again. Sarah nodded, thinking of Martha Blackwood's testimony that had helped seal Thompson's fate. The woman who'd once condemned her to die had found her own kind of redemption in truth. Life's strange, she mused. They left me in Thunder Valley to die, but in doing so, they gave me a path to really living. Mrs. Cooper's voice carried from the kitchen, directing preparations for the evening's celebration. The whole ranch would gather to mark not just a wedding announcement, but the end of fear's long shadow over their lives. You know what this means? Colton gestured to the license. Once it's official, you'll be part owner of all this. The ranch, the land, everything. I already am, she said simply. Not by law, but by choice, by fighting for it, bleeding for it. She smiled. By baking bread in its kitchen and tending its wounded and making it home. He pulled her close, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. When I found you in the snow that day, I thought I was saving your life. Didn't know you'd end up saving all of ours. We saved each other, she corrected. And we'll keep doing that every day. The license would be signed that afternoon, with Marshal Duncan and Mrs. Cooper as witnesses. But the real ceremony had already happened in 100 small moments, in shared battles and quiet evenings, in healing wounds and building trust, in choosing each other day after day. Sarah picked up a pen, its weight significant in her hand. Ready? Ready. Their signatures flowed across the paper, black ink permanent as the promises they represented. Outside, a cheer went up. The ranch hands had been watching through the window, propriety forgotten in their joy. Well, Mrs. Cooper said from the doorway, wiping her eyes with her apron, about time you two made it official. Now come help me keep these men from eating all the wedding food before the actual celebration. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. She kept hold of Colton's hand as they followed Mrs. Cooper to the kitchen, where the house was already filling with people, not ranch hands and refugees now, but family, all of them. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold, and Sarah thought of another morning, cold and desperate in Thunder Valley. She'd prayed for death then, seeing no future worth fighting for. But life, it seemed, had other plans, better, ones than she could have imagined. The marriage license dried on the desk behind them, a new beginning written in ink and love, and the strength that comes from facing darkness together and emerging into light. 1 year later, the photographer's flash captured a moment Sarah would treasure forever. The entire ranch family gathered on the main house's steps, every face bright with hard-won contentment. Mrs. Cooper stood front and center, proud as any. Grandmother, while Jenkins and the hands clustered around cleaned up, but still unmistakably cowboys. Colton's arm rested warm around Sarah's waist, and her hand lay curved protectively over her swelling belly. First proper family portrait, Mrs. Cooper declared, straightening her best shawl. About time we had something to show for all our work. The ranch had flourished in the year since Thompson's defeat. Where fear once ruled, hope now grew as steady as the summer wheat. Many of the refugees had stayed on, building new lives from the ashes of the old settlement. Martha Blackwood had opened a small school, teaching children that faith could nurture rather than control. Look what came in the post, Colton said that evening, holding up a newspaper. The headline announced Thompson's final sentencing. He and his conspirators would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Good, Mrs. Cooper said firmly, though if you ask me, they got off light. Sarah took the paper, reading the details. James Blackwood had turned state's evidence, revealing decades of crimes, in exchange for a lighter sentence. The truth had finally come out about Rebecca, Mary, and all the others. Their stories would be remembered. Marshal Duncan says they're using our case to change territorial law, Colton added, making it harder for men like Thompson to hide behind. Religion while committing crimes. Sarah touched the family portrait, still drying on its easel. They didn't die for nothing then. All those women, they're part of making things better. The ranch itself had grown, absorbing abandoned settlement lands and offering new starts to families seeking honest work. Where Thompson had built walls, they built bridges. Where he'd used fear, they offered hope. Mike Harris had married one of the settlement girls, his crooked arm a badge of honor at their wedding. Jenkins had been promoted to full partner in the ranch's operations, his steady leadership proven in crisis and peace alike. Sarah's garden flourished where the original gun positions had been, wild roses climbing the rebuilt fences. She'd planted flowers for each of the women lost to Thompson's cruelty, living memorials that bloomed in defiant beauty. Thomas would love this, she told Colton one evening as they walked among the blooms. He always said beauty was the best answer to ugliness. Colton squeezed her hand. He'd be proud of you, of everything you've built here. Everything we've built, she corrected, touching her growing belly. Their child would be born into a world so different from the one she'd known a year ago. A world of justice and possibility, rather than fear and limitation. The family portrait took pride of place in the ranch house's main room, a testament to how far they'd come. Mrs. Cooper kept it polished, sometimes pausing in her work to study the faces. So many stories of redemption and renewal captured in a single moment. "You know what I see when I look at this?" she asked Sarah one day. "I see a prophecy." "What do you mean?" "I see what Thompson feared most. People choosing love over fear, truth over power. Look how many smiles there are now, where there used to be only shadows." Sarah understood. The ranch had become more than a safe haven. It was a blueprint for something better. Other communities were taking notice, sending representatives to learn how they'd built such strong bonds across old divides. "We're expecting more families next month," Colton reported at dinner. "Word's spreading about what we've built here." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "Let them come. Let them see what's possible when people stand together." The summer sun set golden over the ranch, painting everything in shades of promise. From her rocking chair on the porch, Sarah watched the evening routine unfold. Horses being settled for the night, children playing under Martha's watchful eye, couples walking arm in arm. The family portrait caught the last light through the window, each face glowing with the truth of who they'd become. Not victims or refugees or bitter survivors, but people who'd chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. Sarah felt her baby move and smiled, thinking of the future this child would inherit. A legacy not of fear and control, but of love and justice and the courage to stand for what's right. The portrait would show them where they came from, but the story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Thunder Valley looked different in spring. Where Sarah had once seen only death in its snow-covered expanse, now wildflowers dotted the grass, and new life stirred everywhere. She sat comfortably on her horse, her 6-month-old daughter Grace, secured in a sling across her chest, while Colton rode beside them. "This is where your father found me," she told the baby, who watched the world with curious eyes. Where one story ended and another began. The new journal in her saddlebag held the whole tale, written in quiet moments over the past year. Not just her story, but all of them. Rebecca, Mary, and the others who died under Thompson's reign. Their voices would live on, a testament and a warning. "You sure about this?" Colton asked softly. Sarah nodded. They'd come to scatter wildflower seeds, a memorial to those lost, a celebration of those saved. Martha Blackwood had suggested it, and others from the old settlement had joined in, each bringing seeds from their own gardens. "Look," Sarah pointed to where the first settlers had left her. "Life grows even there now." Indeed, spring flowers had already taken root where she'd nearly died, as if nature itself was determined to transform places of darkness into light. Grace reached out to touch a passing butterfly, her laugh carrying on the warm breeze. Other riders appeared on the valley's rim, Martha, Mrs. Cooper, Jenkins, and more of their extended ranch family. Each carried their own seeds, their own memories to plant. They'd turned remembrance into renewal, just as they'd turned the ranch into a sanctuary. "Marshal Duncan sent word," Colton said as they dismounted. "3 more communities have adopted our charter. They're calling it the Thunder Valley Compact, rules for building places of justice, not just law." Sarah smiled, settling Grace more comfortably in her sling. The baby's weight against her chest was a constant reminder of how far she'd come. From that desperate night, so something good grew from all that pain. They walked together through the valley, scattering seeds. Martha's voice rose in an old hymn, not one of Thompson's threatening dirges, but a song of hope and renewal. Others joined in, their voices carrying across the land that had seen so much sorrow and was now witnessing rebirth. "I used to hate this place," Sarah admitted, taking Colton's hand. "Now I see it differently. Without what happened here, we wouldn't have found each other, wouldn't have built what we did. And you wouldn't have found your strength," he added. "I had it all along, we all did. We just needed to stand together to use it." Grace fussed a little, and Sarah soothed her with a gentle bounce. Her daughter would grow up knowing the whole story. The darkness and the light, the fear and the courage, the hate and the love that had shaped their world. The sun climbed higher as they worked, promising another warm spring day. Sarah thought of that cold morning when she'd lain in the snow, thinking all was lost. She'd prayed for death then, but life had answered instead. Fierce, demanding, beautiful life. They gathered finally on a small rise, watching the valley stretch before them. The scattered seeds would bloom in their own time, covering the ground in colors that would remind everyone who passed. Here, love had triumphed over hate. Here, justice had overcome cruelty. Here, a woman left to die had risen to help build a better world. "Ready to go home?" Colton asked as the others mounted up. Sarah took one last look at Thunder Valley, seeing not what was, but what would be. Next spring, flowers would bloom here. Next year, more communities would embrace the changes they'd started. The future stretched out as wide and promising as the valley itself. "Yes," she said, holding her daughter close. "Let's go home." They rode out together, leaving the valley to its transformation. Behind them, the first seedlings were already reaching for the sun, turning a place of endings into one of beginnings. And Sarah Mitchell Reed, once left to die in snow and shadow, carried within her the greatest truth of all, that love, justice, and courage could transform any wilderness into a garden, any wound into wisdom, any ending into a new and better beginning.